Robert Gates served as director of the CIA under President George H.W. Bush and Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush and Barack Obama. He is also by training a Soviet and Russian expert, which is what he got his PhD in. Welcome, Secretary Gates. Let me begin by asking you, you've always been very clear-eyed about Putin. You told President George W. Bush that when you looked in his eyes, you didn't see his soul, you saw a cold-blooded killer. But I want to focus on the cold-blooded part. You've always viewed him as rational, calculating. His military interventions have been carefully planned, often limited, the one in Georgia. Does this strike you as something different? This feels like more reckless. He doesn't seem to be worried about the enormous costs he's taking on. What do you think Putin's strategy is?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Fareed. This is different. And this behavior is different than in the past. He's been a calculated risk taker in the past. And he's made at least two terrible miscalculations in launching this war. One was the resistance of the Ukrainian people, and what President Poroshenko and you've just been talking about. The other miscalculation was, I think he didn't expect the kind of united response from the West, not just from NATO and the United States, but from others that are not part of NATO. And he's ended up with Russia being completely isolated. And I don't understand at all putting the nuclear forces on alert. This all seems to me like, in some respect, he's gone off the rails. Maybe it's 2 years of isolation at his dacha outside of Moscow. Maybe it's the fact that he's only talking to the hardest line people from his intelligence past. I don't know, but this behavior is different, and it's very worrisome. And the fact that he launched this war, I think it speaks for itself that he has made a gigantic miscalculation, regardless of how the war turns out.
So that worries me even more to hear you say that. How would you then deal with somebody who has become unpredictable, mercurial? What would be your advice to President Biden?
I think the president and his team are handling this pretty well. I think that maintaining the unity, the solidarity of NATO and the rest of the world is very important. I think the Chinese are very uncomfortable with what Putin has done. So I think that keeping calm, not doing anything that would make Putin think that we might get involved directly in Ukraine, the putting on alert of the nuclear forces, to me, is quite worrisome and frankly inexplicable. So given what his state of mind may be, I think we need to continue to make clear we're not going to engage directly militarily. By the same token, I think the administration's sending of additional forces to Europe, and particularly the armored brigade, is the right thing to do. And sends the right signal, particularly to the East Europeans and the Baltic states.
You know, people keep saying that it's a new era because the West is declining, but what I'm struck by is the real new era might turn out to be the decision by Germany to cross the 2% barrier and spend on defense. I mean, this may revitalize the Europeans to actively take the kind of forward-leaning defense posture that you advocated when you were Secretary of Defense.
Well, this is another one of Putin's miscalculations. He thought he would divide NATO, that NATO was falling apart. He's given NATO a new sense of purpose, a new sense of unity. It is increasing its military forces. He wanted to push NATO away from the Russian border. He's going to end up with more NATO forces in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states for the foreseeable future. I think he thought that he would pull Ukraine back into Russia's orbit. In fact, he's driven the Ukrainians to be even more pro-Western at this point. This is all totally different from his expectations, I think.
Secretary Gates, stay with us. When we come back, I'm going to ask the Secretary Gates, what is the long-term solution here? What is the long-term strategy for the West, and how might Putin respond? PS with the former Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. Secretary Gates, in your memoirs, you talked about how Russia had some legitimate grievances, that the Treaty on Conventional Forces did restrict Russia from moving troops even within its own country, that even Ukraine and Georgia becoming members of NATO was something you could understand alarming the Russians. But can those legitimate concerns of the Russians be dealt with now after they have violated so many laws, norms, breaches? You know what I mean? Is there, how does one get to a point of strategic stability in that part of Europe?
I think that's going to be very difficult, Fareed, with as long as Vladimir Putin is in power. I think what we have to understand is that the post-Cold War era is over. And in many respects, the United States and our allies face a situation we have not faced since World War II. And that is, we have two superpower adversaries, one in Europe, one in Asia. Our so-called holiday from history is over. And we have to figure out, how do we conduct a global struggle against both of these powers, a global competition. And we have to, a pivot to China is not sufficient. We have to consider how we're going to deal with a hostile Russia, at least for as long as Vladimir Putin is around. I think Russia will be a problem for us, a security challenge in Europe, as long as Putin is there. But I think we can hope for a different kind of Russia once he's gone. We face a much longer term kind of problem and challenge from the Chinese. So we have to figure out, how do we reboot, in effect, our national security strategy? And it can't just be now focused on China, but is much broader. And this is going to be tough. And the American people need to be educated about why this is different and why it's important, and why the international environment now is much more perilous than it has been for the last 30 years.
And Russia and China are very different. Russia, kind of fundamentally declining power, using military muscle to make itself more relevant. The Chinese are long-term economic rising power. Do you think that there is a way to create space there? You pointed out the Chinese are very uncomfortable, even though they are supporting the Russians. They do not seem to like the fact that they have to do that.
Well, I think they see benefit in having a partner in working against the United States and trying to create as many problems for the United States as possible. But this invasion of a sovereign country is contrary to everything the Chinese say they believe in. And in fact, a week ago, their foreign minister said that they continue to believe in the importance of non-interference in other countries, and that included Ukraine. So I think this particular issue is a problem for them, but they do see convenience in this partnership, if you will, with Russia in working against U.S. interests wherever they can. I think that the security situation in Europe, actually, the invasion of Ukraine has awakened the West and awakened, I hope, political leaders in this country to the reality that this challenge has been building for several years, and the invasion of Ukraine basically is a cold shower that has finally awakened everybody to the fact that these two powers represent a global challenge to the United States and to our allies in Europe.
A final question, I don't have a lot of time, Mr. Secretary. Is it possible that there could be domestic opposition to Putin, or opposition within his circle, and that we could see, maybe not now, but a few years from now, a Russia without Putin?
Well, I think we inevitably will see a Russia without Putin, and it could, as I said, it could be a very different kind of Russia. But clearly there's opposition. The demonstrators going out in the streets, the humiliation of the head of his intelligence service at Putin's hands that was televised a few days ago. suggests that there are a lot of people who have concerns about this decision. And all we can hope is that that opposition inside Russia builds as they realize the cost of this invasion of Ukraine.
Secretary Gates, pleasure to have you on always, sir. Thank you.